So I'm Mike Ehlers. I'm Laura's husband and Jack's son-in-law. And first, just to reiterate thanks to many friends and colleagues and students and family members who've been able to join this event. Really particularly to thank Bakersfield College and Reggie, Sally, Susan, Tarina, and Chancellor Christian for helping to make this possible. So I first met Jack in 1990 when he was exactly the same age that I am today. And I had the good fortune to be dating his daughter, Laura, at the time. We were both in college in Caltech in Pasadena. And Jack and his wife at the time, Marcy, had driven down to Los Angeles to visit Laura and spend some time in the city. And I remember having lunch at the Crocodile Cafe on Lake Avenue in Pasadena and feeling the usual trepidation about meeting your girlfriend's parents. But as anyone who knew Jack can imagine, what could have been an interrogation of this potential family interlocutor was instead a really interesting conversation on all kinds of topics. And Jack was electric in his wit, and welcoming in his style and demeanor, in a way that really struck me at the time. I have a feeling that I, however, made a less vivid impression. And I have evidence for that, because that first meeting in Pasadena was followed a few weeks later by a second meeting, where my close friend and college roommate Mary Stipe and I were driving up to Fresno to visit another Catholic friend of ours. Being rather smitten with my girlfriend Laura and wanting to make a good impression, I decided to stop by Bakersfield on the way and say hello to Jack and Marcy as a courtesy. What a great boyfriend. And this was the era before cell phones, and I think perhaps Laura might have mentioned to her father that I might be stopping by or not. But in any case, the dutiful boyfriend with college buddy in tow rang the doorbell at Jack and Marcy's house on Cedar Street. Jack answered. Not being on a first-name basis at that point, I simply said, "Hello, Dr. Hernandez, it's Mike Ehlers. Very good to see you again. This is my friend, Mary Stipe. We're driving to Fresno, and I thought I would stop by to say hello." Jack very eagerly let us in, had us sit down in the living room. He started asking how everything was going. I think we had coffee. After a while, Marcy came in and joined us. As the conversation went on, though, it became abundantly clear that Jack had no idea how self-evident I was. And in fact, seemed to think that Barry and I were former students of his. It took a good 20 minutes, some casual references to Caltech, and for Marcy to take Jack aside to get to the point where Jack realized that I was that guy that Laura had brought to lunch in Pasadena. A funny thing about that was afterward, Jack, in speaking to Laura, admitted the initial confusion and said, "I don't think Mike noticed." But, of course, I had completely noticed. That episode stuck with me for a few reasons. One of which was I realized I needed to work harder on being a better person. But second was that Jack's almost reflexive approach was to invite people in thinking they were former students of his, asking how they were doing even when he could not recall who they were. To me, that is emblematic of Jack's personality, but also his commitment to his students, those that he had taught, to their life and growth, and I suspect similar interactions and reconnections with his former students were a common part of his life, having touched so many people at formative periods of their young adult lives over the decades. In the ensuing years, I got to know Jack much better. He never failed to recognize me again. And I grew to know him over time when a new chapter of his life was beginning. Namely, the reconnection and even rapprochement with his daughter and his more extended family in Texas, his sister Kathy and his nieces and nephews, many of whom are here. Jack and Laura had been somewhat estranged prior to that time being in Pasadena in 1990 and had not been close to them. So that point marked a very new chapter. And one of the great joys I have had over these past 32 years was watching and participating in that reconnection, getting to see the sinews of a father-daughter relationship and an older brother-younger sister relationship reform, and those of a grandfather-grandchild and uncle-niece or nephew relationship form. In my own case, it's a bit cliche to say that my father-in-law was like another father to me. Most of the time people are lying, by the way, when they say that. But it was simply true. We had so many things in common, so many shared interests, but came together from very different perspectives. He was the writer and philosopher, while I was the scientist, and he taught me new ways of looking at interesting problems and thinking about the world. And I would like to think that I did the same for him. We shared a passion for reading and history, curiosity on the origins and drivers of human behavior, thought, emotion. Jack was my Scotch drinking buddy, which I learned at this gathering was a very large group of people. I, at least, for one, can't remember a time when Jack was not game for a good glass of Talisker or Lagavulin. I always felt we had a connection for both having grown up in the Midwest. Myself in Nebraska, Jack in Michigan, with some common features of how we were raised and how we were both misfits in a way for the settings of our youth and had to chart our own distinct courses. And Jack certainly did chart a distinct course that has left a remarkable legacy, as we've been hearing about today. When I think of Jack, I think of all the many family trips and vacations that we spent together. He was always willing to hop on a plane and make the time. Museums and shops in London, traipsing through the vineyards and exploring the countryside around Bordeaux, hiking paths in Montana or Colorado or Idaho, walking through small villages in Galicia and the northwest of Spain, inevitably searching for a coffee shop or joking about whether he should introduce himself to some attractive older woman. We spent a lot of time together in France on several visits. One of the most memorable to me was when he and I together visited the chateau and tower of Michel de Montaigne, the famed 16th century French author, philosopher, and statesman. It was pure magic to see Jack so in the setting of this most influential thinker and writer, to see Montaigne's study, the inscriptions of essential wisdom in Greek and Latin that Montaigne had carved 450 years ago on the wooden beams on the ceiling in his office that Montaigne used to keep him grounded, which of course Jack could read. So some of these inscriptions resonated. Everything is too complicated for men to understand. The man who thinks he knows something does not know yet what knowing is. Or on the more humorous side, on the highest throne we are seated, still, upon our asses. That one evoked one of Jack's characteristic infectious, full-throated laughs. On all these occasions spent with our family, Jack was a mythical figure to his grandchildren, the magical Grandpa Jack, who would make voices and act and draw, write stories. He was the Wizard of the Woods on a trail in Montana, a Celtic druid at Standing Stones in Spain, or Jack the Rapper helping at a rhyme just in time. Every book read aloud by Grandpa Jack was a book that came along. But beyond trips and vacations, Jack was a frequent visitor to our family over the years. In fact, he was the most frequent family visitor, and I wish he'd come more. Whether in Baltimore, Durham, North Carolina, Mystic, Connecticut, or Boston, Jack would find time to fly out for important events or unimportant events just to spend time. And as a consequence, he became known to so many of our friends, was such a natural at fitting in and made lasting impressions. Nearly all of our close friends across these many years have known Laura's dad, as he was referred to, and would make a point to want to get together when he was coming to visit. Not exactly the typical response of your friends to your parents. The one that speaks to Jack's magnetic, inquisitive, outgoing, youthful, and just plain fun style. In thinking of Jack, it's hard not to think about his sense of humor, hear his laugh, or recall episodes of his often hilarious irreverence. I can visualize Jack going to a Renaissance fair with us in full costume, perfect for his thespian and oratorical predilections, or buying and sporting a provocative shirt with a nude, draping, dripping imagery from a Dali painting and reveling in the responses of passersby to this dirty old man. This is a few. His was a life that warrants celebration. I'm so grateful to have had him in following this whole time, and especially over the last 11 years. I had lost a father. He had previously lost a son. And we were there for each other. So I hope that his memory, legacy writings, generation of students live on to reflect and honor the remarkable person he was, and life he led. We've heard it here today in the master class of life. Jack has left us with our minds more open and our hearts more full, and that is something to celebrate. To end, as much as Jack was able to employ so many forms, you can think of the written and spoken word, essays, short stories, plays, poems, it was only in his later years that he reached the pinnacle in extending his repertoire to rap. And in honor of that achievement, I'd like to end my comments with a rap. And yes, this is exactly what you all feared, a middle-aged white guy rapping against something. But here it goes. Teacher, boy preacher, today's main feature. Play life on the field and not from the bleachers. Master of the pen and tennis shoes. No need to choose a favorite booze. Couldn't change a fuse. Have jalapenos on the table. That ain't no fable. Spice it up while you're able. Because Moses brought down no laws that help you deal with menu pause. So look around, take your time, find meaning in the verse of mine. Saved every dime. Walked marches forced. Taught philosophy course. Yes, twice divorced. Miata, pseudo Porsche. Looked within, not for faith or sin. Found the words, joy, the grief, the good, the hurting, Wolf and Morton, Thomas Merton. Jack the Rapper, thinker, no tinker, critical mind, no hook, line, and sinker. Left his voice on the page, every age, life stage, praised us, amazed us, and made us courageous. Look around from floor to rafter. There may be no ever after, but Jack Hernandez, we hear your laughter.